Well, good evening, everyone. We've got 26 online here for the Minnesota Woodworkers Guild virtual meeting for September 2020. So I said there's 26, and we'll keep letting people into the meeting as they come on. As everybody is joining, their audio is automatically muted. We prefer to keep it that way. You get this many people on a Zoom call, and too many people try to talk, and it becomes a real problem. For those of you who are familiar with Zoom, please use the chat function, and you can send a message to everyone. And Eric Hansen, who is right there with our presenter tonight, will pick up those chat messages and relate any questions that you might have. At the moment, I'm aware of one of my board of directors on the call, Bob Krabbe. He's one of our directors at large. I haven't seen any of our other directors pop in just yet. But do recall that the guild is run by a board of directors. And right now, we really need some help with our program committee. We're down to 3 members of the program committee. They've been working very diligently to keep our monthly meetings live. Not live like in person, but live like they're still happening and are not dead, right? And they really need some help. So if anyone has any inkling of helping with the program committee, I would really appreciate if you contact me. You can get my contact information right there on the contacts tab of our website. Let's see. Our sponsors. We just had a board of directors meeting last night, and George Lucas, who is our sponsor liaison, reported that he's been able to visit a number of our sponsors here in the last 4 weeks, and they're all really quite busy. They really, during this pandemic, a lot of people who are staying at home realize that they need things done around the house. So a lot of contractors are really busy, and the contractors are keeping our sponsors quite active. Even the ones who don't supply specifically, like contractors like Rockler and Woodcraft, they've been very busy during the pandemic, and they really appreciate your business. So when you're in to see them, tell them that you are a member of the Guild and that you really appreciate their support, and hope to be able to continue that for a long time. On the topic of Northern Woods, I did see that Charlie Kasorik has joined our meeting tonight. Charlie is the chairman of our Northern Woods Committee. I won't put him on the line to tell you what's going on, but basically, we had to cancel Northern Woods Exposition for this year. And we've all agreed that beginning in January, we will reconvene the committee and try to assess where we are and see if it's prudent to establish a date for next year. One other thing to talk about, let's see, fall seminar, of course, that's been canceled this year. I talked with Bob Krabbe and Richard Tendick last night. Everything is still okay for setting up for next year in November. Our presenter is still available, our venue is still available, and we're kind of sitting on pause right now, waiting until spring, until we actually need to start doing things actively again. And of course, the tool swap was postponed for this year. Make sure it's on your calendar for September 18. That's a Saturday, 2021. It will be at the Bloomington Armory. We're all hopeful that we'll be able to hold it then. And let's all keep our fingers crossed. Let's see. Announcements. I don't have any particular announcements. One thing I would mention, you'll recall back in February, we announced winners for our newly revived tuition grant program. Both Eric and Cindy had signed up for classes, and of course, both of them had been canceled due to the pandemic. Eric intends to attend class this November. Cindy is still searching. She was going to go to the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship up in Maine, and they have not reestablished a schedule for this year. So she's going to try to find something else. Last month, we did have winners for our door prize. I guess we shouldn't call it a door prize, right? It should be a screen prize because that's how we're all meeting now. We're not going through doors. So anyway, our screen prize for last month went to some familiar names. Just this is random drawing. Richard Tendick received a gift certificate, $25. Gladys Walker, Kevin Alto, Bill Teitman, Mike Nesnadal, Rudiger West, Gary Nelson, and Bruce Ebner. They were all selected at random, and Eric Hansen, who's managing that here as a member of the program committee, has already, I believe you've already contacted everybody, Eric. If not, there'll be one coming to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who is at the workshop of George Vondriska. And Eric, please introduce the program and get things kicked off.
Thanks. You can hear me?
Got it.
Excellent. I'm in Hammond, Wisconsin at George Vondriska's shop. So being a Milwaukee Brewer fan and standing firmly on Wisconsin soil, I can wear my Brewer t-shirt tonight and webcast that. Before we get into tonight's topic, I wanted to kind of give you a heads up on things planned for the next, maybe 4, 5, 6 months out. October, we've got a couple of options that we're refining yet, so we don't have anything definite there. November is going to be all about wooden toys. And we've got 3 presenters. One is the lead CEO of TLC Toys here in Minnesota. They are a charitable organization of woodworkers that makes toys for underprivileged kids. That's a program that operates with a large shop that is run by the 503c organization and volunteers all over the Twin Cities. Then we're going to jump out to the West Coast and go to the San Diego Fine Woodworkers Guild. They also have a toy program. Theirs is different than TLC Toys, but has some really neat stuff to it, including the fact that they published a book of a couple hundred pages with diagrams and drawings of toys you can make and all the steps involved and all the materials. It'll be really an interesting part of that meeting. And then we're going to jump out to the East Coast, to the Carolinas, and there's a guild group out there that also has a long-standing toy program. And it's so well developed that the toy program literally created the need for a shop that they have out there. And it's a really tightly organized toys for charity.
Sorry about that.
But those 3 presenters will be on in November. In December, we're not going to do our typical tour. Can't do that this year. We're going to instead have a holiday party, and it'll be woodworking related. There'll be some education to it and some fun and sharing. You just have to bring your own beverages and your own snacks, but that'll be December. Early in 2021, we've got 3 or 4 topics lined up. Depending, some are more of our shop tours like we did a couple of months ago. I think it was August. We did virtual shop tours around the metro. We also, if we can do a live tour, we'll be doing a live tour at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and looking at their program to train woodworkers and combine it with arts, and we'll be in their shop. And we've got some other good stuff coming up in 2021 also. Right now, as I said before, I'm with George Vondriska, and George has Vondriska Woodworks. George is also the lead editor, managing editor of Woodworkers Guild of America, and teaches woodworking on all kinds of skill levels with all kinds of different approaches and techniques and tools. And tonight it's going to be all about dovetails, but not the dovetail that you and I probably think of, but it's the dovetail I want to learn, which is how can I do this?
It's all about you again, Eric.
Yeah, it's all about me. Because I'm not doing so well with dovetails with my router and my rockler jig thing, but I think the bandsaw is a better option.
All right.
Turn it over to George.
All right. Thanks. Well, first off, I want to say thanks to Eric and everybody else for including me in these events, these teaching opportunities. It's one, I'm very honored when I'm asked to do this, and two, I really enjoy teaching in general, and I'm glad we were able to take advantage of technology to keep doing this even when things are shut down a little bit. So like Eric said, what we're going to do tonight are dovetails. More specifically, we're going to do bandsaw dovetails. And this is something, honestly, this is an idea that I generated. This was an American Woodworker article probably 20 years ago that I did on general bandsaw techniques, and this was one of them. And a couple, why would we do this? Why would we bother going in this direction? And there are a couple reasons for this. To be specific, we're going to do through dovetails. So it could be that you own a router-based jig, and it's not uncommon for router-based jigs to only do half-blind dovetails and not have a through dovetail template that comes with them. So one thing with this could be, yes, I can cut them with a router, but I can't do throughs. So we can do that here. Another would be that even if I've got a Porter cable 4212 that will allow me to do through dovetails, my spacing is controlled by the jig. So there's a template on the jig with fingers in a set position, and every time I cut, the router and the guide bushing are going to follow those fingers. And it's a great way to do through dovetails, but every one of them is going to look identical. And part of the benefit to doing hand cut dovetails is that you have full control of the spacing. With bandsaw dovetails, we have that same latitude. We can control the spacing to be whatever we want it to be. So you can start to emulate the look of hand cut without doing hand cut. So what comes out of this is that for me, this is exactly the same approach I use sequentially as when I'm hand cutting dovetails, but it eliminates from it the mechanical memory, the muscle memory of running a handsaw to be able to cut, to make those cuts, and using a hand chisel to take the sockets out and that kind of stuff. So I think it gives you a lot of the benefits of a hand cut dovetail, but takes advantage of the bandsaw in order to do them. So what we're going to do, big picture, we're going to talk about dovetails in general initially, and I want to make sure we're all using the same jargon. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about dovetails, and that's why the whiteboard is here. And then we're going to look at a shop-made jig that you have to have in order to do this. And then from there, we'll lay out the joint, we'll get to the bandsaw, and we'll start cutting. So first off, Eric, if you can zoom, because we're on a Zoom meeting on the bandsaw, on the dovetail there. This is a bandsaw dovetail that I've already cut. And like I said, it's a through dovetail. So that's our first definition here. What's the deal with a through dovetail? With a through dovetail, regardless of which side we look at, we can see a component of the dovetail. When we look at this face, we can see the tails. When we look at this face, we can see the end grain of the tail. And then here, we're looking at the pins. So with a half blind dovetail, when we looked at this face, we would only see a flat face. We wouldn't see the end grain. But with a through, each component goes all the way through the mating component, and that's what gives us a through dovetail. So then to be more specific, I'm going to take this one apart. And this part of our joint, this is the tail board, which oddly enough then has the tails cut into it. And we have a pin and socket board. The sockets are the negative profile where wood was taken away. And then the pins are the positive profile that are left behind. To be more specific, this in the center would be a full pin. And out here on the outside of the board, we have a half pin and a half pin. The difference being on this full pin in the center, it's got an angle, a slope on both sides. On the pins out here on the edge, it's only got an angle, a bevel on one part of it. So half pin, full pin, half pin. And that jargon is the same whether you're in a through dovetail or a half blind dovetail. We have full pins, half pins on both joints. And then, like I said, the sockets are the waste that we're going to take away. So looking at this one, fairly uniform spacing on that. Looking at this other one, non-uniform spacing on that. So again, one of the benefits to this is you have full control of that layout and you can make it go in any direction that you want to go. All right, Eric, then let's go to the whiteboard and we'll mess with this a little bit to see. I'm not sure we'll be able to eliminate glare.
That's not too bad.
Okay. So there's a little bit that you need to know about the geometry, the mechanics of a dovetail joint in order to move forward, because we're going to end up talking about a shop-made jig. And in order to be able to do that, we need to understand the dynamic of a dovetail joint a little bit more. So very specifically, what we're going to talk about is dovetail slope. And the dovetail slope is the angle at which we're cutting the tail. If you have a router-based jig, you're probably simply using a 14-degree half-inch router bit to cut those. And that's very, very, very common to router jigs. That gets us pretty close to the slope numbers that we're going to talk about. Most traditionally, dovetail slope is expressed as a ratio. So 1:8 or 1:6. 1:8 is the ratio that we talk about for softwoods. 1:6 for hardwoods. And what that means is it's like talking about kind of a rise over run. It's like talking about pitch on a roof. What it means is that if I go out 8 inches and I go up 1 and I connect the dots, that's the angle that we're talking about for softwoods. Sorry, I'm flip-flopped. Live television. As people in the audience are screaming. I was just trying to see who was going to catch that.
So far, no one has.
Okay, 1:8 is hardwoods. 1:8 is hardwoods. 1:6 is softwoods. And as soon as I drew this angle, then I knew where I had gone kerflooey. All right, so if I draw a line 8 inches out and 1 inch up, that, my friends, is the angle for hardwoods. If I go 6 inches out, 1 inch up, that's the angle for softwoods. And what's different about it, what we're after there, proven over the test of time, this isn't my deal, this is hundreds of years old, is that when you have a harder piece of wood, you can have a shallower angle, because since the wood is harder, it would be very difficult, even if the angle is shallow, to pull that tail through and the grain of this tailboard to collapse as we're pulling it and then escape the joint. On a wood that's physically softer, we go to a shallower angle so that we have more bite into the pin and socket board. So if you're hand cutting your dovetails, then when you look at those gauges, those dovetail gauges, they're commonly available in these slopes, 1:8 or 1:6. And again, the reason that we're talking about this is because you're going to make one of these. And in order to make one of those, we have to understand this. Now, me being the lazy woodworker that I am, for my shop-made jig, I didn't do 1:6 and I didn't do 1:8. Can you take a guess, Eric, at what I did to be lazy?
Maybe a 1:7.
I did a 1:7. That's right. So, why would I want to take up a 3,200 square foot shop with 2 dovetail ramps? So I only made 1. And the way I did that is to just make it at a 1:7. So now, are you jumping on the camera, Krista? All right, you're here just in time for a Zoom. So Krista's here. She's going to run the camera. Krista's done lots and lots of live streams with me, lots and lots of videos. We're going to do a Zoom here on the dovetail ramp. And nothing against Eric, but Krista's been on this camera a bunch. So, all right. So when you build this, I made mine out of 1/2 inch Baltic birch. And really the meat and potatoes of this is the wedge right there. That's what gives us our slope. Very, very simple. Just like I drew on that board, I measured over 7 inches. I measured up 1. I connected the dots. And then I used my bandsaw to cut a ramp for this side and identically a ramp for this side. Then we have a base piece and a top piece. They sit on the ramp, glue, brads, pin them together. And then we need a little bit of a shelf here so that when our material goes on there, it doesn't slide downhill. Very, very simple. And then generally I mark them. Yeah, so this was made a long, long time ago, but it says right there 1 and 7 for bandsaw dovetails. That's so that when I die, my children can identify my jigs, like they're gonna care. All right, any questions popping on there for us so far? Okay. Next thing, I'll talk about the blade, but we'll wait on having Chris to zoom on it until we get over there. My blade choice for this is a 3/16. That's how wide it is. 10 TPI, 10 tooth per inch blade. And we have to hit some compromises here. You'll see when I cut this that for parts of the joint, we want to cut perfectly straight. And that is going to be obvious when we come in and we do something like this. We want to come straight down on these sockets. However, there are parts of this joint where we have to be able to turn the corner and come across the baseline of the socket. So that's the benefit. In the perfect world, for cutting the straight parts, we'd have a nice wide blade because it's easier to cut. The wider the blade, the easier it is to cut straight. However, because we have to turn the corner to cut the baseline, we need a narrow blade. So that's what got me to 3/16. 10 TPI, because our goal with this is just like when I hand cut dovetails, which admittedly I don't do often, but just like when I hand cut, I want to go from saw and chisel to fit without any work in between, no cleanup. So same thing here. We have a 10 TPI blade so that the cut quality is good enough that we can put these together right off of the saw without having to do any cleanup. So if we went to a more aggressive blade, a 4 TPI is my standard everyday blade on the saw, that would be way too rough a cut for the joint when we go to put it together. A couple other things that we need. It's handy to have a marking gauge. More specifically, this is a cutting gauge because it's got a cutting wheel on it instead of a spur. I'll come down on the table, Krista, so I'm not moving that around on you. This is a Lee Valley, a Veritas product. The cutting wheel on here will cut a really crisp line when we go cross grain, which we're about to do. It does a way better job than a marking gauge does. You don't have to have this. I'll show you a workaround, but for accuracy, it's a good way to go. And then we're also going to need a square. And then it's handy to have an adjustable square for your layout. We don't need a dovetail slope gauge. That doesn't do us any good. The ramp is taking the place of that. So you could actually stay tight, Krista. And what I'm going to do with, did I say that too late? Sorry. Okay. We'll stay tight for all of this layout now. Okay. With this cutting gauge, when I set this, I want to set it so that its distance slightly exceeds the thickness of our material. When we look at the joint that's complete, one of the things you can see here is that this end grain is projecting past this face grain. And that's the way I always do this. It's the same way I do any joint that's going to run by each other. I make it so that one part bypasses the other, glue the joint together, then come back with a block plane or a sander, your method of choice, to flush them up after the fact. Don't try to make them flush right out of the chute. So because we want to overshoot, we want this distance, which comes from this distance, to be set so that it slightly exceeds the thickness of our material. Now, my common thing with what I just showed you with that end grain is to call that, I'm a fingernail catch beyond. In the world of measurements, it's probably about a 32nd of an inch or so. So as I set the cutting gauge, that's what I'm shooting for, 32nd beyond. And then with that, what that'll let me do is, this is where I'm going to do my work. I'm going to just scribe that across, and this will be a shooting challenge for Krista to see that knife line. Does that?
Oh, you could see it where you had it.
Okay. Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to go another step here, because when we get to the bandsaw, I know from doing this before, it's very hard for you to see this when I get to the bandsaw. So I'm going to take a pencil and just track it to fill that in, and then you'll be able to better see the cuts I'm doing on the bandsaw. And then same thing to the other board. We only need to do it to one face, but of course, if we were making a box, I would do this end and I would do this end, so that we're working our way around all 4 pieces. I'll fill this one in. Now, if you wanted to, now we're ready for layout. And our layout is going to happen on the pin and socket board. So for me, exactly the same way I do hand cut dovetails, I do the negative profile first, I do pins and sockets, then we trace that onto the tail board in order to make a tail board to fit. And of course, that is the right way to do dovetails, he says, jokingly. This is one of those things, you know, if you want to start a fight in a bar room full of woodworkers, you stand up and say, the only way to cut dovetails is sockets first. And then there'll be another faction that says, no, it's tails first. But it does with bandsaw work, especially. I think it works best if we do pins and sockets first. At this stage of the game, if you want to do everything by eyeball, you could, which would be, you could just lay a square on here and start making lines. And remember our jargon. This is the pin and socket board. So half pin, full pin, half pin. We're going to do a 2-socket joint. If you want everything to be consistent, which probably if you're actually making a 4-sided box, you're going to want, you could take an adjustable square, give yourself a layout line and a layout line. Strike down from the end. Readjust your layout. Strike down from the end. And then what I would do on a 4-sided box is I would label this, that's A, because what will happen, a human being is about to cut these. And A is probably going to be slightly different than B and C and D. So then when we get to the next step where we're transferring this to the tail board, I would identify this as A, because we're going to have a distinct fit here, a different one here, a different one here as we work our way around the box. Okay, so bandsaw is going to be next, Krista. So you be you, and I'm going to be here. You need to roll in, maybe, so you can get a little more on top of it. Oh, it's just catching the cord. Now, before we go anywhere, can you just get come in on the blade so they can see? And I'll revisit that again. 3/16. That is the width of our blade. 10 TPI, 10 teeth per inch. How many? That's our tooth count. So in the world of bandsaw blades, this is a very, very, very fine bandsaw blade. But again, fine tooth count, so we get good cut quality. Narrow blade so that we can make the turn when we get to that step. Now we're ready to use the sled. And when you do this, you do want to keep in mind that we've got 4 lines on top of the board. And in order to get our pins and sockets out of this, angles that will oppose each other. So what that means is that on this board where this is waist and this is waist, I've got to have this angle this way, this angle this way. The way I keep this straight in my brain is when the ramp is angled down to the right, which it's my right now, I cut the line on the right the line on the right side of the socket. Then we're going to flip this. Now this is angled down to the left. I cut the left and the left. Good question at this stage of the game would be, tables tilt on a bandsaw. So why not just tilt the table for this setup? And there are a couple reasons. One is when I have this set to 90, I like to keep it at 90 so that I'm not coming back and resetting. Two, a couple bandsaws in the marketplace allow you to tilt in both directions, but not too many. All bandsaws will tilt down to the operator's right, but not many will tilt down to the operator's left. And then additionally, just getting that kind of fussy setting of, I know I want 1 and 7. What's that angle? We could do the geometry and figure it out, but then I have to get that set up in this direction. If my table tilted both ways, I'd also have to get it set up in this direction. If I just take a half hour and make this ramp, now I'm tilted down to the left. Now I'm tilted down to the right, and I never had a mess with my bandsaw table. When I do this, I'm going to be real careful, but this is not the critical step because any work we do here, we're going to match in the next step. So I'm going to be careful. The biggest thing I'm being careful about at this stage of the game is the blade coming in perpendicular to the end grain. In my perfect cartoon bubble, I'm following the line. But if I come off the line just a little bit, I want to make sure I'm cutting in parallel to the line. I want to make sure I'm cutting straight, perpendicular to the end so that I get a good cut there. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do cut on the right, then I'll flip the sled, do the other cuts. Another thing to pay attention to, can you zoom out for a sec just a little bit, is my hands. To get control on the bandsaw, I don't have my hands up here on the sled because that makes this motion an arm motion. I put my heels of my hands on the bandsaw table and control this with my fingers, and that gives me finer control. Your arms are your arms are good for big movements. Your fingers are good for small movements. So by anchoring my heels and controlling this with my fingers, I get a lot better control, and that's exactly what we need in order to be able to do this. If I lower this a little, I don't want to block your view. Is that still good for you? Okay. All right. I'm going to cut. A quiet moment because I'm putting in my earplugs, which you guys can't see. All right, follow the line, cut to the baseline. Anchor my hands, fingers only. This is a race that goes to the slow and steady. Skip a line, go to the next one. No. Turn the sled, lines to the left.
Hey, George, a couple of questions.
Hit me.
George,
Well, don't
a
hit
couple
me.
of
Just.
questions. Why not use a fence on the bandsaw
Oh,
to align that jig?
So the question is, why not use a fence on the bandsaw? Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about a fence in a little bit. So it's a great question, and I'll show you. We'll talk about a fence in a little bit. Yep. Okay. That it for questions?
That's it.
Okay. At this stage of the game, if we're doing a full box, then pivot the board, do the other end, and also cut the other board. Once we're done with that, then we're also done with the sled. This is the only spot we use the sled. Now we have this with our sockets, pins, and the opposing angles that were produced by using the ramp. So next thing is to clear out waste. And what we'll do, we'll come back to the bandsaw for that. And what you'll see me do is come into the socket, and I'm going to turn. That's why we need a narrow blade. Get on the baseline, and I'm going to cut to this inside corner that we just created. But when I get there, the waste isn't going to fall out because the blade is perpendicular to the table, but the cut inside here is not. The cut's at a 1 7 angle. So you'll see me lift the board just a little bit in order to get that waste piece to fall out. Then come around in the other direction and repeat. This, I think, is the hardest part of this operation because we're freehand cutting the baseline. And when we put the dovetail together later, the face of the tail marries against that baseline. So if when you're cutting this, you get real snaky, real kerflooey, it's going to show up when you're trying to meet the flat face of the tail. We're also going to talk about workarounds for this. If you don't want to do the step on the bandsaw, we'll talk about a different way to do it. I'm going to leave the guard up higher than I normally would, so it's easier for you to see. But typically I would bring that upper guide down so that we're closer to the work. And then ready for you, Kristen? All right. I'm coming into that socket away from my angle line. Don't come in on the angle line. Come into waste wood, start your turn, pick up the baseline, anchor your hand, fingers do the walking, extra points if you're old enough to know what that means. I've hit the inside corner, but the waist is still bound up till I do that. Whoop. Same thing, coming the other way. Lift until the waist comes out. All right. Can you give me, Krista, just a second on the, come back in and give me just a second on that joint, please. All right, there's our pins and sockets. And again, change the layout however you want in order to give you the spacing or layout change that you want.
George, is it always lifting the away side of the board to get that angle?
So are we always lifting? Well, I was lifting the side away and away. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No matter which way you're going, it's going to be, you're going to lift the edge that's away from you. Yes. And then you could stay tight, Krista. We're going to go to the bench right to this other board if you want to just pivot. Does it not have enough tilt?
Okay.
Yeah, the flies are bad in here today. It's from working all day with the doors open. All right. Now remember, this is an A board that matches this A board. Baseline is already on here. And this is why, to some extent, no matter what we do here, the A board is going to fit. Because the way we're going to make it fit is we're going to take the back face of this board, put it on that baseline. And if you want to clamp a board here so that you have something to register against solidly, it's not a bad idea. I'm going to put that against the baseline, flush it with the edges, and then trace it. Now remember, we used a cutting gauge to do the baseline. So what could we do this with instead of tracing with a pencil? We could do this with a marking knife. And more specifically, you would want a left-handed knife and a right-handed knife, depending on which pin you're tracing. I'm going to do it with a pencil. But before I do that, and the pencil is so that you can see it when I get to the bandsaw. Just like with hand tool work, there's going to be a function of, if we have a line made by a crayon, you're not going to have any accuracy. So when I'm doing this stuff, I keep a piece of sandpaper on the bench and then just roll that lead across the sandpaper so you really have a needle sharp tip on that pencil so that when we trace, we get a very distinct line. And then in this, now that's our tail, so that's wastewood, wastewood, wastewood.
Could you do those, are you able to do those just a little darker, the lines?
Well, I'll do it on,
Just a little gold from the
I'll
light.
do it on this end and I'll press harder. I don't want to press harder on the end I'm going to cut because it'll make the lines fuzzy, but we can get the point across. Thanks for pointing it out. So they'll look like this. Now this end is missing the baseline because it's my raw end, but then that's waste, waste, waste. All right, if you, go ahead.
I don't know how I know this, George, but sometimes if you don't make your X's to mark the waste, you can cut the wrong part out.
You're asking for a friend? Is
I'm
that,
just asking for a friend, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I
could you zoom
maybe
out a little
haven't
bit?
done that, but
Yeah, it's,
I've heard that people have done that.
and I think with what we're doing here, with hand tool joinery, there's an opportunity for there to be an accumulation of issues. So marking the wastewood so that you keep mental track, that's part of it. But then also when we get to the cutting step here and we're knowing which side of the line to be on, we're going to talk more about that in a second. Keeping your pencil needle sharp and or your marking knives very sharp and your cutting gauge very sharp, because we're at a point here where tiny parts of an inch are going to make the difference between this joint coming together or not. When I go to cut these, so my hand tool experience came from teaching for Peace Corps in Africa. And it was teaching woodworking, yay! Teaching hand tool woodworking, oh my God! I had not done any hand tool joinery before I went into Peace Corps. So there was a little bit of a crash course of training from Peace Corps. But one of the really cool things that happened, I had a relationship with Fine Woodworking Magazine before I went, and I sent them a letter. I'm at the school, no electricity, everything is by hand. I have no idea what I'm doing. So they sent me a case of Tag Frid. I know I always say his name wrong, but this was 1989. He was like the hand tool guy of the time at that time. And it was a book all about hand tool joinery. So in his book on dovetails, I'm reading this at night by the light of a kerosene lantern. And it said, cut pins and sockets first, trace them, cut the tails. When you cut the tails, cut away half the pencil line. And I yelled at the kerosene lantern, what? Cut away half the pencil line? Are you nuts? But really, that's the dynamic. In the end, by learning to cut them, I learned that he's right. What a surprise. Because of the way that the line is generated, if you actually cut on the waist side of the line, you're leaving the tail too big. So when I do this cut, it's a very fine line that we made with a very sharp pencil. But in this poplar, which is a relatively hard wood, I'm gonna try to cut away half the pencil line to get a good fit out of this. If you're in pine doing this, you could be way more to the outside because pine fibers are gonna compress. If you're in hard rock maple, you better do half the line because there's no forgiveness in hard maple. It's either gonna fit or it's not. And if it's too tight, you're gonna crack them. So my mission, Jim, if we choose to accept it, is to try to cut half the pencil line when we do the tails. Yes, sir.
There's a question, and I think maybe an answer. Brad Hanson, you could confirm if this answers your question. Brad's question is not the tilt a function of how you enter the waste for the first cut?
I don't know. I don't get the
Kelly
question.
said he did that so that the fat part of the pin was on top, so it's always left. If you did it the other way, you'd cut into the pin along the baseline, which is bad. And Brad says the answer's good.
Okay. You guys, you don't need me at all.
Yeah.
It's all internal.
Without you, they wouldn't be
Well, so
answering and connecting.
And it's a good question that it's a thing that I didn't talk about is when I laid out the pins and sockets, we were looking at the inside face of our box, the inside face of our board. And this is about rocking it up. Is that what? Yeah, it's the last thing you want in any kind of joinery is an overcut in the piece because it weakens the remaining material. So as I rock that up, the blade is on the surface I can see, the blade is right in that inside corner. And then as I tilt it, I can feel that waste fall out, and that's how I know when I'm done. And if you go a little too far, then you're going to cut into the remaining pin, which I think that's what, yeah, that's bad. Okay. All right. So we can come back to this, and I'm going to go through the whole thing again, anchoring the heels of my hands, using my fingers, trying to take away half the pencil line. Outside corner is easy. I'll come in, then I'll pick up the baseline. When I do the chunk in the center, that's going to be an in and an in, then an in and a turn, like we had to do on the tails. Then I'll have one more to do out here. Everything is quiet while I'm putting my isotunes in. Okie dokie. Hands anchored, fingers pushing. Down here, the reason we need a narrow blade.
George, we've lost your audio. Gang, it looks like we've lost the feed from George's shop. I see his image is frozen. Yes, Eric, we've lost you. Okay. Good luck. Good luck. All right, so I was just on the line with Eric. They're trying to get reconnected there. Technical difficulties. While we've got this lull, I was reminded that during the quote business part of the meeting, I skipped over the invitation for anybody who wanted to share something they've been working on. If you do have something you want to share, why don't you send a chat, and we can we'll make a log of who wants to present something, and we'll do it as soon as George is finished on his end. All right, so Charlie Kosorik says he's got something. I've been following Charlie's Instagram postings, and I think you'll all enjoy what he's got to share. And it looks like George is back. He wants to be let in. Should we let him in? I guess so. Anybody else got something they want to share?
Ed, I think we're back.
Sounds like it. We can hear you.
All right.
Right. How far did we get?
You were just cutting some waste out on some tails there.
Oh, we're doing bandsaw dovetails. Is that the deal?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So it seems like before technology got the better of us, I was hunkered down here at the bandsaw completing this cut. And then what I was starting to say when Krista realized we lost our connection, what Krista and Eric can see, and you can't because we're zoomed in so tight, is that when I'm making these cuts, I'm really in my Zen woodworking mode here. I'm really concentrating. I'm really paying attention because we want those cuts to be straight. We want to be perpendicular to the end grain like we talked about, not on the tails. But in this case, the tails are being cut to work we've already done. The pins and sockets are already complete. So getting those tails right is really, really critical so that hopefully they're going to fit. So it's something where you want to have good light. I would normally have the light on my bandsaw on, but we've got a bunch of studio lights set up. You want to have good light. You want to be able to just be focused on what you're doing, not having distractions, and you want to give yourself the opportunity to practice this ahead of time. Now, let's revisit a couple things. The fence issue or the fence question came up. So in the world of how can I simplify this process? So one approach to making this more easier, and I would do this, especially if I were doing all four sides of a box, is I'm just going to raise the upper guide up so you can see more better, even way more better. When I'm using the ramp and I'm cutting pins and sockets, we could position this fence for that first half pin, lock it in place, make that cut. Then rotate the board, make that cut. Get the next board, make that cut, make that cut. Then go to our next position for that angle, make that cut, make that cut. So the fence would give us that repeatability and make it easier to make that cut. Remember, I talked about it being important that we cut perpendicular to the end grain. You could even go a step further. And in this case, my board is just loosey-goosey cantilevered past the jig. If we registered these two together, we could even have a stop on the fence where when we make this cut, it would automatically stop us when we got to the baseline so that you didn't have to control that either. So that's using the fence for this aspect would make it easier. Then one of the things I talked about is when we get to the baseline, getting this dead straight is one of the harder aspects of this joint, especially across such a long run like that. If we were doing this by hand, we would have cut those parts with a handsaw, then we'd be coming back and clearing waste with a chisel. Of those two operations, the handsaw one, I think, is harder because we're trying to get the mechanics, the muscle memory, to follow a line, cut at the right angle, the dovetail slope, stop in the right spot. So another way to do this would be use the bandsaw to make these cuts, but then use a chisel in a traditional hand tool way to chop the waste from the bottom of the sockets. And the rule there with hand tool work is always use the widest chisel you can that'll fit across those sockets. That makes it easiest to get those nice and straight across the bottom. So we could marry those two up. Then same with your tails. With a narrower chisel, we could be using a chisel across here in order to take that waste out. And interestingly, just a side note, dovetails is why bevel edge chisels like this exist, is so that we can get the chisel right into that inside corner where that tail is leaning into the waste like that. If it was a square edge chisel, we wouldn't be able to get in there. So those are a couple things that can simplify this. What else?
Just wisdom off the group of Zen mode and 1,000 practice cuts will reduce errors.
Yes. Yeah. So it's, it's a thing I admonish woodworkers for all the time when I'm doing this teaching is we're very prone to, it's almost Christmas, sorry, but it is. When it's Christmas Eve and you're looking to make a gift for somebody, you're going to run out to the shop and want to do through bandsaw dovetails for the box you need Christmas Day. It's like anything, yeah. Like anything, playing guitar, playing piano, riding a horse, doing woodworking. You need to practice this stuff before you actually need the skills. Poplar, like I'm using today, is a very good practice wood in general for joinery. It's inexpensive, it machines well. It's hard enough that it challenges you, but it's not so hard that it's a pain to work with. Pine, I think, is a little too soft to really be testing you and your tools to see if you're really getting the results you want. So poplar's a really good compromise between being close grained, a little bit hard, not that expensive. But yeah, you really want to practice this before you need it for your first project. All right. Should we see if it fits?
Yeah.
All right. For that, we have to swing back to the bench. And my fit deal is on any joint, I'd like to be able to tap them together by hand, not have to use a mallet. And then when they're together, hopefully they stay together. So there's enough friction there that it'll hold together on its own even before I add glue. I can do pretty near anything. How much rotation? What are you looking for?
Other way. Yeah, that's good.
Well, don't get too close. What if it doesn't work? Oh, darn, we're out of time. Thank you. So that's as long as you're there. Let's do this. I'll just come back in. Again, our end grain, face grain relationship, fingernail catch. Glue the joint together, come back with a block plane or a sander and clean that up. And then again, I'll point out, is it too hot? Do I need to tilt it a little to see that face? That relationship between the face of the tail and the baseline here, that's that cut I kept talking about, is you really want to concentrate on that to get that nice and straight, or chop that out with a big wide chisel instead to guarantee that it's nice and straight. So we talked about reasons for this. You know, maybe you don't own a dovetail jig at all, or you own a dovetail jig that only does half blinds and you want to do throughs, or you own a dovetail jig that does both, but you want to have your own creative control of the spacing. And then again, remember, you can mix mediums here. You can do a little bit of bandsaw, a little bit of chisel work in order to make this as easy as possible for you to get results out of it, good results out of it.
No other questions right now. What else is going through your mind online?
Yeah, any other non-bandsaw questions? Or how many people are on now?
We had a total of 53. We've dropped.
Nice.
So anybody else got any questions for George here?
I'd give my on-the-road teaching schedule, but there isn't one.
I think you did a very nice job, George. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I know a lot of people are intimidated about dovetails, and this is certainly one approachable approach.
Good.
Excellent.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, it says, will this be recorded for everyone for future reference? Absolutely. We have succeeded in mastering our technology, and this session is being recorded. The Guild does have a YouTube channel. We successfully recorded our June meeting, and it is out on the Guild's YouTube channel. We missed July and August due to technical difficulties, and but this one seems to be working just fine. So in a few days, we'll get this one edited and put out on our YouTube channel as well.
All right.
Okay. If there's nothing else to add, then we'll sign off from here. I was totally paying attention to the dovetailing, but I do think the Milwaukee Brewers are leading the Cardinals 4-1.
That's just a suspicion.
Totally, eh?
Suspicion, yeah.
Well, you guys could sign off there. I want to invite everybody to stay on for a few minutes. I was reminded, well, that I didn't give anybody an opportunity to share what they have. Charlie Kosorik says he'd like to share something. So Charlie, if you know
That
how.
amazing box. It's that amazing box he made, I bet. It's really crazy cool.
I've got a box I'd like to share too. So we'll do both of those. Charlie, you're
All right.
first.
Well, thanks so much thanks for having me.
Thanks, George. You did a nice job.
Really appreciate it. All right. So, am I on?
Yeah, you need a shave.
Yeah, I need a shave, and I'm 8 weeks out of a haircut.
Power.
But, okay. I got a black screen here. I don't know about anybody else.
That's because you stopped talking.
Oh, if I'm talking, then I'm on there. All
Yep.
right. So, okay, I'll show you guys. I got this box I made. This is what do you call it? Bent lamination jewelry box that I made. I have it sitting here. Oh, Ed, I don't know. You're still showing on my screen. I don't know. Anybody think? Well,
You're showing on our screen.
okay, good enough. Try to get the camera to hold the laptop. Can you guys see that?
We can't hear you, Charlie.
Can you see that?
You got to get closer to your mic so the video switches over.
Oh, oh, shit, this is tricky then. Can't just lock me in?
Nope.
Well, shit. Really hard to do with using the laptop.
Just talk loud.
There. Now can I see that? Hello?
There, you're on. Keep talking.
Oh,
Talk loud.
Good, good. Okay. I know you can lock me. I know there's a way to lock me in there, Ed, somehow without having to talk. But anyway, so that's it. It was a fun project, and I had some amazing, wonderful spalted maple, pearly spalted maple, and yeah. And oh, by the way, if anyone would like to buy this, I'm donating it to a charity auction that's going up next week. So if anyone's want to donate to a good charity and get a cool jewelry box, this is going to be there. Let me know if you're interested in that.
Well, you need to tell us what charity and when.
For Midwest Special Services, they have an annual fundraiser. They call it a gala, and you can go to their website, MSS or Midwest Special Services, and you can register for the gala. They call it Celebrate, and then they're going to have this and all kinds of cool stuff. They get dozens and dozens of things that people are donating that they're going to auction off, and cabins, trips to Duluth or whatever, stuff like that. So bottles of wine. So anyway, that's that.
Very good. Very nice box, Charlie.
Thanks, Ed.
I'm following you on Instagram as you've gone through to build that.
Yeah, the drawers. Oh, I should mention too, the drawers on that really kicked my ass. And one of the things about them is the box is elliptical, so they're curved, but they're not just curved, they're asymmetrical, which was harder than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, it took me probably 2 weeks to make the drawers, but now that I know how to do it, I could probably do it in 10 days.
There you go. Very good. Very good.
You got some cool stuff too, Ed.
Yeah, I'll share this. I've got a box here that I did. This is a commission piece. I've done, if you were all at the Northern Woods back in 2019, if you can remember when we used to have Northern Woods, there were a couple of chest boxes at that show. This box was built for the same fella, a local collector. It's a replica of an 1860s Germanic. The original was built somewhere around Germany or in that area of the country, and of course the original was real ivory and ebony, and this one is real ebony, but because of the international trade moratorium on ivory, it's a synthetic ivory. This was a little challenging too. As you can see, it's got that checkerboard inlay. Those are all 1/4-inch squares. After I did a little bit of internet research, I learned how to fairly easily make that stuff, and it turned out really well. It has a, let's see, I got to get to the other, there's another picture here. We got to get here. We can get on the next picture. Easier said than done. There we go. So this is it opened up. It's got a red felt lining in it. And then on the topic of chest collectors, there's a collector out on the West Coast who sells his stuff internationally. And he had this chest set commissioned by a sculptor. It's all carved out of Eastern white walnut, pardon me, Western white walnut, but he needed a display case for it. So the display case is, it's 30 inches square, 6 inches deep. And as you can see, it's mostly glass with a little bit of walnut around it to keep all the glass together. That was a fun project to design and work on with him. And it was also a fun project to ship out to Washington State. But it made it the first try in one piece. So that's it. Anybody else got anything they want to share? Let's see, people just need to double check Charlie Square. Beautiful chessboard. Nice, Ed.
Ed, I would share something and ask for some advice from you guys if I could.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn this camera around. And hopefully you can see the table there. This is an entryway table that I just finished. I modified a design that I found in an old fine woodworking magazine. And the interesting parts of it are the floating top. That was kind of fun to do. And the most challenging part was building the curved and tapered legs and then mortising a curved leg into the apron so that the leg was still perpendicular to the floor, even though the leg isn't exactly perpendicular to the apron. So it was an interesting project. It's one that I haven't tried before. But here's my question. I finished it with water locks, original sealer finish. And I'm happy with the finish. But there's going to be some glassware on top of this table, which is see down below. And what I'm finding, oh gosh, two and a half weeks out from the final coat of finish. But if I set that heavy piece of glass on the top, after it sits there for a while, when I lift it up, there's just the slightest tackiness. Now I can't feel it when I touch the top. It feels perfectly dry. But I'm wondering what's going on with that finish. I did talk to Waterlocks, and they said just let it cure, and oxygen will eventually harden everything. But I'm wondering if anyone in this group has experience with that finish and can advise me.
Yeah, Jerry, I use water locks quite a lot. How many coats did you put on? How long did you dry between each coat? And how did you treat the surface between each coat?
I did 6 coats on the top. I did allow 24 hours between coats. And I started doing a little hand rubbing. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy online whose instructions I followed. But he suggested on coats after the second, put on a third coat, for example, and then while it's still wet, sand it with 220. And then the next one, while it's still wet, sand with 320. And that produces a smoother, something closer to a hand rubbed finish. So that was how I finished off the top 3 coats.
Okay. And then, well, when you put on 6 coats and only allow 24 hours between them, you're going to run into a long curing problem. How long has it been since you put the last coat on?
2.5 weeks.
Wow, that should cure out. How old was your water locks?
Oh, it was new.
Hmm.
So I'm a little perplexed by it.
Yeah, I normally, I only do 4 coats. I put the first coat on, let it soak in, wipe it off. I put the second coat on liberally, let it cure for 24 hours. Third coat I put on, I wet sanded on with 600 grit.
Okay.
Let it cure overnight. And then subsequent coats, 1 or maybe 2, depends on how much sheen I'm looking for. I apply with a basically a French polishing pad. So it's an extremely thin coat. And I leave each one of those dry for 24 hours. And then I don't do anything with the piece for at least a week. And then I'll rub it out with steel wool to get the luster that I'm just looking for and wax it. So I don't know, the last 3 coats you put on, did you brush it or pat it, or how'd you put it on?
Added it.
Yeah, it might just be a little thick and it just might take a while to cure out.
I just saw a note from Charlie. You said that you're not surprised it's not cured yet? Charlie, are you still there?
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. I've used Waterlux and my opinion is that it cures and dries more slowly than most other finishes, most other film finishes anyway. And any film finish that I've used, if I get a lot of coats on like you did, which is probably a good thing, it takes a long time for that stuff to cure, to fully
Okay.
cure and really get hard. So I'm not surprised at all.
That's kind of in agreement with what the Waterlocks service guy told me. One thing, while I was working on this was when we still had hot weather and high humidity. And in their instructions, they emphasize having circulating air, but they don't want it circulating in an air-conditioned space. They said there's not enough oxygen exchange, and that affects the curing. So I think what I need is just patience. I'm hoping that's enough.
I think that's all it is. I think actually I would say if you have the time, just let it sit for a month.
Mhm.
Okay, guys, that's the kind of advice and reassurance I needed. It's the first time I've used that finish.
And it
Okay.
looks great, by the way.
Yeah, it does.
Thanks. I'm working on a matching bench. I adapted the design so the bench will go on the other side of the hallway.
Cool.
It's a fun project.
Good. Good job.
Thanks.
So anybody else got anything? The advice is really free, you know.
That's what I was hoping.
All right. If nobody has any questions or anything else to contribute, we will draw this meeting to a close. Thank you all for joining it. I think George did a fantastic job, and we'll get a recording of this out on the internet here in a few days.
No door
Thanks, everyone.
prizes?